we get started properly. First, unless you're called on to bring your questions or comments into the conversation, we ask that you mute yourself. It makes it easier for us to hear one another if everybody's muted and there's not a lot of incidental racket coming from the background. So do that. As always, we want to make this as conversational as possible. And to do that, we ask that you put your questions, your comments, things you'd like to hear our conversationalists talk about, whatever it is, put it in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. And after our conversationalists have had a chance to engage one another, then we'll turn to your questions and comments and bring you into the conversation. So this works best the more interactive it is. So don't be shy, and pop your questions and comments in there. This is a especially terrific messy conversation, or one I'm really looking forward to. Today we have our own Rosa Garza-Mourino, whom I think probably everybody knows. We'll be in conversation with Kris Kuramitsu. And the topic is the craft of Asian American activism through art. So I just love the intersection of all of these things: activism, art, the AAPI community, all of that. So it should be a wonderful conversation. We can't begin, or I don't think we should begin, without acknowledging a couple of things that have happened in the past week. I guess the first one was actually back on January 3rd, Keenan Anderson. Those of you in LA in particular know that was an African-American young man who died at the hands of the LAPD. And after a week and a half or so, we learned that Keenan was also a graduate of the AULA Masters in Education program. So these things are always hard, and then they just seem to hit doubly hard when it's a member of an intimate community like this. And then, of course, also on the 21st, the evening of the 21st, the killing of 11 at the Star Ballroom Dance Studio in Monterey Park. And you know, that's still unfolding in various ways for all of us. And just the more I hear about it, I mean, yeah, heartbreaking. So there is that. Yesterday was also Lunar New Year, Year of the Rabbit, which I have been told is the year of hope. So that's a good thing to hold on to as we begin our work for the rest of this year. Last announcements are next week. Our own Anna Kwong has invited 2 persons from her neck of the woods up in Santa Barbara, Dr. Jardine and Dr. Simmons, who will be with us in a conversation about anti-racist pedagogy. So as faculty, as students, as staff, we all have a stake in that topic, and encourage you to turn out for that and bring a friend. And then the week after that, the first messy conversation of February, which will be in honor of Black History Month, Clarence and I are going to be in conversation for the Messy Conversations Book Club. And our book this time around, too small for you to see, but I'll hold it up anyway. Just an amazing book by Saidiya Hartman, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments, came out in 2019. I just love this book. So we'll be in conversation around the book that's looking at the lives of young African-American women from Philadelphia and New York at the turn of the 20th century, who were often leaving plantation life behind and moving to the big city, and then encountering whole new kinds of economic oppression and how they made their way through that. And it's just glorious. So I look forward to that. ASA has put the chapters, we're going to concentrate on 4 chapters, so you don't have to read the whole book. 4 chapters in here. He's put that in the chat. And also our new partner, Malik Bookstore, is offering 10% off. So get your copy at Malik's, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. With that, I want to get out of the way, hand this over to Rosa. Thank you for your patience, Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Kris, for joining us. Following up on what David was bringing up, the acknowledgement of what just happened in Monterey Park, I wanted to share with you that a few months ago, when I reached out to Kris to create this possibility of this conversation, we were pleased to see that this was the possibility to be in alignment with the beginning of the lunar year. We are thinking that was very auspicious to start today with that. And now, in light of what happened, there's this element that I was struggling with, this element, a lot of grief the last few days. And suddenly I was going back to the notes and what I learned, educate myself to learn more about the Kris' work as a curator. And I thought that that thinking about having like a curator with us, reflecting about the importance of activist art that push against violence and hate, and that's still auspicious in that sense. So I was just settling for that, and I wanted to acknowledge that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here about that. And I just pasted on the chat to give the conversation to Kris, open the door for Kris. I wanted to post in the chat a quote by Stop Discriminations. There's no typo there. That's the way the organizations. And this wonderful quote that I pick up from the exhibit that Kris put together, the coverage of this, the KCET made about this. And I'm going to read it. We are artists, writers, educators, and organizers who continue to consider how we can creatively use our skills and resources rooted in the arts towards social transformation, and how we can best use of our platforms, which include our respective art communities, who we often bring together in coalition, right? So I think it's a great opening, Kris, for telling us about your curator practice. How do you identify with social justice and activism in your practice? And you can share with us part of that, and then we can cover all the things from xenophobia to collective art.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction, and it's really nice to be here. I heard a little bit about the program from Rosa, and it sounds really incredible. So I'm very happy to be here speaking with all of you in this context. So I guess I can talk. I will talk a little bit about kind of the general contours of the exhibition. And I have some images, so if for those of you that didn't have a chance to see it, I can kind of take you through the show and talk about what was included in the show, but I'll also talk a little bit about, I guess, my background. So I'm sort of not as just kind of plopped into a little square for you. Just talk a little bit about, my experiences and how I came to this and this exhibition and the subject matter. So yeah, but thank you for having me here. It's a really, it was absolutely kind of inspiring to hear about the Antioch and the programs that you're doing and the way that you function. I think is quite interesting. So Yeah, I mean, I am a curator. I'm based in Los Angeles. I have been working in LA for several decades now, many decades. And originally trained kind of as an art historian. And I intended to be an academic, and got sidetracked by getting really interested in artists, living and working artists, and being able to kind of talk with living, breathing people about their ideas and how they make things, and work with artists as they're, you know, making work, and being able to work with actual art objects. So academia turned into an interest in kind of curatorial work. And you know, working with artists to kind of help bring the work that I am interested in and care about kind of to a wider public in many ways, either, you know, putting together exhibitions or writing about it, or you know, in particular, helping artists produce their work and get it into public view. So I've been doing that for many years, and have always been quite interested in, you know, kind of Asian American artists, artists working in, you know, from different positions, different social positions, and making work to expand narratives about who we are, and who we are as a society and culture, and kind of recentering stories, for you know, kind of all of us. So you know, I have taught some, I have written a little bit, and done some curatorial work with different institutions, as well as doing kind of curatorial work with private collections, which is another kind of aspect of the work that I've been doing for a couple of decades. And all of that sort of feeds into each other to basically support the artists and artwork that I really care about. So with that, that's just like a little background on me. So I'm not just kind of dropping into a square out of nowhere. I've been in LA for a very long time as well. So a lot of the artists that I've worked with are Los Angeles based. But I also, because Los Angeles is such a global metropolis, my work is necessarily international in scope as well. And so I do a lot of work with, you know, kind of international artists, and bringing people into conversation through art. So and as a kind of sideways segue to, I guess I should just talk a little bit about the exhibition at hand, right? So I curated the exhibition Voice a Wild Dream for Oxy Arts, which is a gallery that is kind of housed within Occidental College. It's in a storefront in a sort of community-facing kind of almost a retail strip on York Boulevard. So it's a pretty well-trafficked location. And it is a gallery that's been open for a couple of years, with the sort of mandate to really kind of act as a space where the university, where Occidental College and the community can kind of come together. Oh, thank you. Great. Yeah, so here's some images of the exhibition. So the gallery approached me, actually Meldia Yesan, who's the director of the gallery, approached me about working with them to produce, not only produce an exhibition, but to teach a class that sort of paralleled the exhibition, which I was really excited about that opportunity. And knowing the profile of the organization and knowing the, and the mandate of Oxy Arts to be a sort of a place where the school sort of interfaces with community. I thought that the idea of Voice a Wild Dream sort of came into being, looking at Asian American arts collectives who were, all working towards, kind of activating some kind of social change through their work. And, the community of Highland Park is, and Eagle Rock is a really interesting one. It's sort of a lot of different, just like all over Los Angeles, a lot of different communities coming together in one location. Namely, there's in the sort of Highland Park, Eagle Rock neighborhood, there's a very large Filipino American population as well. So I thought it was interesting to think about this as a context for this exhibition. Let's see, I guess, should I just, I don't know if anybody has questions at this point. I mean, I'm happy to make it very, very conversational. But I can also just kind of talk a little bit more about the show and show some images.
I have a following up on part of what you said.
Sure.
The idea of the collectives. What makes the collectives is specific to the Asian American activism in the arts? I've been studying myself different movements that use the arts as a way to advance activism. And there's something about the use of the Asian American community with collectives that call my attention as something distinctive, but I wonder, what do you find about it?
Well, I think, I was looking at basically, just to kind of give a full big picture of it. This exhibition was really birthed out of the pandemic, and that it's its first context. So, as it really is a response to the kind of rising tide of anti-Asian hate that kind of reared its head, or sort of maybe was always there, but really kind of found a broad platform during the last couple of years. And I think just it really arose out of conversations that I had with a lot of different, people in my community, artists, art workers who were, actually really just trying to find each other and come together at this time when we were all, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, all sort of pulled apart and, kind of kept apart. We all were trying to find, a space where we could talk to each other. This exhibition, I think, rose out of, really rose directly out of that moment. I was looking at points where Asian American communities sort of came together in kind of kind of collectively voice a wild dream, as it were, and to kind of enact some sort of social change through the work the creative work that they could do together. So that's, that is really where that the kind of impulse for the exhibition came into being. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Kris. And do you want to share some images?
Sure.
So people can ask questions about it, walk people through some of the images. Do you want to show them yourself, or should I show them?
I can do either. I have a short little like keynote thing I can launch. So I guess if I do that. I don't know if you can see my screen at all.
You're not sharing your screen.
Okay, here, let me see if I can go like, oh, here, share screen.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's see. All right. So can you all see that? Yeah. Okay, great. Maybe I'll start here with a sort of first gallery installation view. So the exhibition is called Voice a Wild Dream, Moments in Asian American Art and Activism, 1968 to 2022, which is obviously an incredibly, almost impossibly large time frame. But I wanted to kind of call out those dates very specifically, just because 68 is the moment where, you kind of have the term Asian American coming into being. I think that was a sort of origin point for a lot of Asian American activism, the definitions of Asian American community, and kind of being able to call out that as a starting point and then bring it entirely to the present, to 2022 when the exhibition opened. So I kind of wanted to focus on collectives and moments where people came together to sort of work together creatively and sort of express their positions, move, kind of move the needle forward socially, doing it as a collective. So I think we, during the exhibition, hang on one second. I have an active household here right now. We chose to focus on collectives and moments where people came together to do this work together. And I guess I'll just start with the sort of beginning of the exhibition in the late 60s with Ghidra. You can see here. Ghidra was a magazine that was made by on the campus of UCLA and kind of rooted in the Asian American Studies program at UCLA kind of made by 6 students basically as an editorial collective. And it was published from 68 until I think 74 was the last issue.
Can you show the slide for Ghidra?
Yes, yeah, here, this is, let's see if oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the covers of this magazine newspaper that was really published out of UCLA for about a year, and then it sort of transitioned they found a house, a sort of storefront off campus in the sort of Jefferson Park area. And it became a sort of independent publication. But this was an image that was used to as one of the covers of the magazine, and it was an image that we used as the sort of visual for the entire exhibition. We thought this was a really obviously a really strong graphic image. This kind of it's a self-portrait by an artist named Richard Tokunaga, who was a graphic artist and printmaker, and made this self-portrait, you know, kind of out of these, you know, this very kind of graphic and elemental self-portrait. He talked a lot about the colors and wanting to do black and white and sort of red, as, you know, kind of it's kind of a reddish orange color. He, you know, it's a strong color, powerful colors, and red referencing, you know, kind of politics, and a kind of a red orange as being a bit of a slightly in between color. He actually talked about it being orange, being kind of like a mixture between red and yellow. So, you know, these sort of deeply symbolic colors, and this sort of pensive self-portrait, I think. You know, it's a strong image. He is you know, it's a image of a thoughtful person, I think, and that's you know, we thought this would be a really nice graphic for to represent the exhibition, and this kind of moment of you know, kind of strength and you know, kind of trying to find inner fortitude. We in the exhibition featured Ghidra, and we're able to represent it through these really wonderful banners that are reproductions of every cover of the magazine, from the beginning of the magazine in '68 until its last issue in '74, and just as objects, as sort of graphic, you know, as a graphic, it's a really wonderful graphic, of course, but they are really kind of a wonderful timeline of this really kind of volatile and you know, it just it's a really dense an era really dense with conflict and actually community, and these images are really powerful representations of the moment, I think, and they're, you know, a really good example of how art and sort of strong graphic identity was an incredibly large part of this political and social moment. There were artists involved from the very beginning of the magazine, and you know, including really strong graphics in every issue was incredibly important. There were literary sections in the magazine every month. So there was a lot of poetry, a lot of drawing, and you know, the idea of having this space for not only kind of political work and political talk and political discourse, but also kind of artistic self-expression as all part and parcel of the same kind of you know, cultural moment and the cultural imperative, I guess, of the moment. So, you know, Ghidra was a really big, you know, was a good starting point for the exhibition. You know, there were wonderful, I could almost take any issue in the run and open it randomly, and there would be like rich, you know, content there, and really kind of meaningfully content that would meaningfully speak to a lot of other, you know, things that we showed in the exhibition as well.
Kris,
Yeah.
thank you for that introduction
Mhm.
to Ghidra. That could be like, in the context of your exhibit, seems to be like the ancestor of the other collectives. And I wonder if you can counterpoint that to the most recent or youngest activists in art. I don't know which one of the groups, because you had 9, you're featuring 9
Yes.
collectives. And which other one you would point out that are somehow learning or standing on the shoulders of these wonderful peoples from the 70s, 60s?
Yeah. I mean, there are, you know, one of the things that I was quite interested in is telling this sort of intergenerational story, or you know, going really from 68 to the present with a lot of these groups and their work. Because there are a lot of you know, connections that you can trace between the groups, not only, you know, kind of politically and socially and kind of conceptually, but like literally. So there are certain figures that appear sort of Zelig-like in each of these different groups. And, you know, their work continues from, you know, kind of decade era to era, and really from, you know, passing from generation to generation too. So there are, you know, I think one really kind of really wonderful example is, you know, looking at a couple of organizations in New York. There's Basement Workshop, which was an Asian American art and activist center in New York's Chinatown in the 70s and 80s. They did lots of, you know, community organizing and also art workshops, and they were all sort of part and parcel of the same, you know, from the same impulse. That lasted from the 70s up until, you know, really almost well into the 80s and into the 90s. And they produced a magazine kind of on the lines of Ghidra, a magazine called Bridge. This is a little, the section that features Basement Workshop. So they produced Bridge magazine, which contained a lot of artists and, you know, kind of poets and playwrights and artists kind of really having community conversations within the pages of the magazine. And it's an incredible archive of that era. There's a group in Chinatown, contemporary group, very much, you know, they're all, you know, now kind of, they got together a few years ago. They're now all in their 20s, I think. The WOW Project, which is a group of young, mostly queer identifying artists and activists that are sort of centered, or the organization is based out of the Wing On Wo shop in Chinatown, which is New York Chinatown's oldest business. Basically, they're I think maybe 3 or 4 generations deep with this business, which, you know, sells ceramics and ceramic ware. And this group, the WOW Collective, was really interested in the history of Chinatown and kind of keeping Chinatown as a sort of self-determined Chinese American space, and kind of trying to mobilize against forces of gentrification and erasing the history of Chinatown. So they actually, I don't know if I have an image of this, but they were working with the archives of Bridge magazine, and as you know, had a group of younger artists looking through the archive of Bridge magazine to produce their own magazine about present day Chinatown. and creativity in present day Chinatown, and the fight against gentrification, which is a multi-generational story, I think, especially in the Chinatown neighborhood. So yeah, there are these kind of through lines amongst the groups in the exhibition, wherein they there are sadly recurring issues that the community is dealing with from decade to decade, but also ways in which kind of younger generations are picking up on the work of previous generations, and really kind of making those connections and making those carrying those stories forward, I think. And then just to say, I think I said this a little bit at the beginning, but there are the idea for the exhibition really came from my conversations with younger artists and younger activists, and people who were interested in this history but didn't have access to the information, essentially, especially at this point of during the pandemic, when people were really seeking kind of models and precedents for political kind of coming together as a community, really, and kind of trying to push forward for some kind of change. And so that was really the early conversations that birthed this exhibition, to kind of talk about this history at this very particular moment in time, when a lot of my kind of younger friends and colleagues were really struggling and trying to find connection and precedent for the work that they were doing. So
thank you for that. Thank you for that connection,
mm-hmm.
Kris. That helps bring in sharp focus the importance of this exhibition, that hopefully is going to keep digging. You're going to keep digging. People are going to ask you to keep digging on these activities and these projects that people are carrying out. And I wonder, was thinking about the othering element in marginalization, how feminist work and civil rights, notoriously African American communities and the LGBTQ plus communities, othered by the mainstream in different ways, by pushing them to the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how the othering has been working with communities that are originally somehow immigrants. I'm very interested in how that works with activism and the arts that coming, for example, from the Chicana experience, how xenophobia and othering have been feeding or giving more like a impulse to the activism of Asian American community.
Mm-hmm.
Happened with the pandemic. So I wonder, what reflection can you share from your work on that? And person with green t-shirt, hello. Wonderful to have person with hi.
Do you want to say hi? You can come and say hi. Yeah, my son is lurking. So yeah, I mean, I think I think the sort of cross-cultural stories here are really important. And this image here, I think the top photo is of three incredible musicians who banded together during the Asian American movement and performed. They wrote songs and performed together, and created an album called Grain of Sand. It's Nobuko Miyamoto, Charlie Chin, and Chris Kuramitsu working together. And kind of, under the banner of third world unity, right? So this is, I think that these moments of kind of cross-cultural, kind of cross-cultural organizing are really key to this story. Yeah, I think the cross-fertilization between all of these movements, certainly at the moment of the late 60s and 70s, and even till today, with a lot of the folks, organizing against abolition, or organizing for abolition against, the kind of prison industrial complex. There's a really kind of, as a strong example, there, the WOW Collective, and some of these. Let me see if I can move forward a little bit. Oops. Oh, I don't have that one.
All the genres, the fabric, paper.
Yes, yeah.
I'm
kind of
medium.
Like moving through this a little quickly. Let me see, I don't have the image. But there are these, a group in Chinatown in New York is really kind of connecting the fight against gentrification with the movement, the abolition movement, prison abolition movement.
Very interesting.
So yeah, I mean, there are lots of moments of intersection.
Yes. I want to bring up, there are some, this is 4:42 at
yes.
5. Some people might start leaving at 5, but
Okay.
there are interesting questions in the chat that can keep us going. And
Sure.
we can keep going with you until past 5:20, right? But just for the sake of people that are still here might leave at 5. There are some questions. Asa, do you want to go over those questions? Or should I?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Catching up.
Yeah. There's Nikki.
The first one, it looks like it's from Nikki. Nikki, would you like to bring your question in, or I can summarize for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I just from noticing on this exhibit, it looks like the collectives represented are mostly East Asian artists, or maybe that just wasn't shown in this presentation, or their lack of representation or resources from Southeast Asians and South Asian artists in the activism front. As an activist myself, I see a lot of divide between East Asian and Southeast Asian and South Asian activism, and I'm not sure if there's any reason why we may not be able to get that representation.
Yeah, that's a very good question. There was a focus on, I think I was trying to narrow it to kind of narrow the scope to Los Angeles and New York as two cities to focus on Los Angeles naturally because we were, I was in LA, and then New York because there were moments in which the crossing between LA and New York, kind of the there was a lot of cross-fertilization, I guess, between the two cities. So geographically, that's how the exhibition was limited. And I do think it is definitely heavily East Asian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino American in scope. And that is, I think, a result of, first of all, kind of starting in the late 60s with these Asian American publications that, and essentially in the late 60s, reflecting the demographics of Asian America at that time. it was more heavily specifically East Asian. But it is certainly it's not an expansive, kind of expansive group of collectives. But I think one of the things I was trying to do with the exhibition too is, as I said, kind of tell those stories as, kind of individuals over time are kind of doing work in different kinds of groups over the course of the decades. So I also wanted to kind of sort of as an undercurrent follow certain figures through different groups and like, there's an artist, a wonderful artist named Tomie Arai, who was a part of not only Basement Workshop in the 70s, but also part of, Basement Workshop and Bridge Magazine in the 70s, and 80s, but also in the 90s and the aughts was part of Godzilla, which is a artist activist collective in New York, and then is now part of a anti-gentrification group in Chinatown. So yeah, there are, kind of individuals that I traced through as well. And that helped, kind of define the scope and structures of the show. Yeah, but I do, definitely acknowledge that this is not a story of Asian American activism, because it is, it is a narrow, I think, and I acknowledge that for sure.
The moments.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question there. Thank you so much, Kris and Nikki. Who was it?
Yes, Kat had a question about the different media that were used in Ghidra to produce Ghidra. Kat, did you want to add? Want to ask your question? If there's anything more specific?
Yeah, I was paying particular attention to the photograph that had the red clenched fist and a couple of photographs on the wall, and then the glass display case with paper images. And I couldn't tell if these were lino prints, if they were woodblock, and what kinds of mediums and approaches are really popular for this type of activism, and what that might kind of reveal about the backgrounds of art and artistry for those creators.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the newspaper was, it was sort of, I think printmaking was a language that I think a lot of the artists were using. They came out of either printmaking, or even there was a lot of cartooning, like kind of people who were drawing and working in cartoons and graphic novels, graphics. And now I have my dog and my child, sorry.
Welcome to
so I think and poetry, I think, is also it was really hard to see. I don't know if I can back up a little bit and you can see some of it. There would often be spreads of kind of like multiple page spreads with like layouts of different poets work, and also kind of drawings done by different artists, and that was a sort of regular feature in every newspaper or magazine. There were also a couple of photographers whose work was reproduced really kind of regularly. You can kind of see in the middle of the case there is a spread of photos by Robert Nakamura, who is a documentary filmmaker and one of the founders of Visual Communications, which is an Asian American media organization in based in Little Tokyo. And this particular spread was his photographic document. He started as a photographer, photographic documentation of the first pilgrimage to Manzanar, which is one of the sites of World War II incarceration for Japanese Americans. So there's like a ring of photographs of portraits of people who went on this first pilgrimage to the site where, you know, it was a pilgrimage in the like, I think it was early, like 1970. So very, very early, before there was a museum, before there was even, you know, it was even acknowledged as a historic site. But, you know, this was a group of Japanese Americans that went to basically kind of clean up the site and, you know, hold sort of communal rituals of remembering there. So that those photographs, you know, there's a lot of really wonderful photography in the pages of the magazine. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But...
That was lovely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Christina.
We did have another question from Lily about who the artists in these collectives were and how they became parts of these collectives. Lily, did you want to add anything to your question there in the chat?
Oh, not particularly. I apologize if there's information there that I missed. Kris, thank you very much for sharing this beautiful artwork collective. It's really, really amazing for me to learn about this. I'm just curious how you reach different artists, how they become a part of the collective, and just how they're able to represent different types of medium. I appreciate that you represent poetry and different art mediums. I'm just curious how they become a part of this collective.
Well, I mean, it varies from group to group, right? So this, you know, this particular group, I think many of them were, you know, it was a UCLA-based kind of endeavor. So a lot of them met as UCLA students, and they were interested in, you know, journalism, and some of them were artists, and they sort of, in the way that you do, sort of come together to make this thing happen, and they pull in their friends and whatnot. You know, there's some other, you know, there were 9 groups in the exhibition. So some of the groups are more expressly, like I'll kind of go to, let me see, go to like this group, for instance, Godzilla, which is a group active in New York in the 90s and aughts. And they were explicitly a group of artists and art workers who were active in New York, in some of them within some of the institutions in New York, but they all sort of found each other as Asian Americans working in the arts, wanting to like kind of increase representation and visibility for Asian American artists. And this is, you know, for Godzilla, the art world, you know, as we know, there are many, many different kinds of art worlds. This was a group that was very active in a very particular art world, you know, which was kind of centered in New York and New York exhibiting institutions. And, you know, they, you know, were, so this particular group was quite focused on the particular kind of, you know, art world as it was for them, which was very, very different than some of the other groups in the exhibition as well. So, yeah, I don't know if that goes to answering your question, but.
Such an exciting topic. David?
Yeah, thanks, Rosa, and thanks, Kim. I really appreciate this. And it's great to have you here. I was wondering naively, about your process, right? So you're
Mhm.
going to curate the show, and then how do you go about not only trying to determine the scope, which I think you've spoken about quite a bit, but also then finding materials, and whether or not, say someone's interested, they're moved by your work and they want to do more research themselves.
Mhm.
Are there archives, like I'm thinking of in a completely different context, but like one archive down at USC
Right.
for LGBT queer, are there places like that, or where you're just hoping people have stuff in their closets?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a little bit of both, but there's a lot of, stuff in closets. I mean, at this point, that's definitely the case. There are certain places where there are some archives that hold some of this material, but like, for example, with Godzilla and their archives, the not Godzilla, Ghidra, with Ghidra and their archives, which is back, let me see, back here. We'll go this way. They're all basically held by one of the former editors of the newspaper. And he had, like, literally when I spoke with him about wanting to include Ghidra in the exhibition, I met him in a parking lot, and he gave me boxes, like bankers boxes full of, he's like, this is my archive. And there are, I think there are a couple of libraries, particularly Asian American focused libraries, that have some collections of like, kind of Ghidra or Bridge Magazine or things like that. But a lot of the information and the history is held with the people that lived it, and are kind of that understand that they are caretakers of it, and they're starting to think about donating things to different places, kind of archives and repositories, but a lot of it is really held privately. Yeah, so I think UCLA's Asian American Studies Library is an incredible resource. There's the Fales Library at NYU, has an incredible repository of things as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it's also a constant, speaking of archives and other things, this is a less sexy part of the exhibition, but like probably one of the most important ones, which is a digital map of different people and organizations and exhibitions of Asian American art and Asian American activism. That is basically a digital map that's collecting and connecting people and activities. And I think, this was a point at which we also not only featured this information in the exhibition, but it was an active site of gathering information, because we're still trying to, everybody's still trying to tell this story. But it is a data map of how people and projects and organizations are connected over the years, and over geographies, and so yeah, that's another sort of, it's an ongoing archive in and of itself, and this as part of the exhibition. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
People appreciate that the Lindas are from Eagle Rock.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that was another kind of wonderful serendipitous, you know, we talked about Giant Robot as a publication. It was really important for kind of like consolidating a sense of Asian American identity amongst Gen X folks. And one of the editors of Giant Robot is a father of one of the members of the Lindas. So there's this sort of like direct familial connection between you know, between these moments in time. So yeah, that was another kind of nice family story, you know, community story / family story, like / you know, sort of direct connection. Yeah.
So we recognize that some people might start leaving because it's 5:00 and wonder we could stay a few more minutes, 10 or 15 minutes for those who might have.
Yeah, I can stay.
questions.
I can stay maybe like 5 more minutes if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Sarah Beth?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kris. I wish I could see this exhibit. I remember you saying that you were diverted by your activism from academia. And I have so enjoyed the many, many activist students, especially during the last 3 years who have joined our community. And I wonder about ways of connecting the work of activists and such as yourself more to academia, and how do you see that, or is that happening other places, and kind of what kind of connection is useful for us and you?
I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that made this exhibition so special and meaningful in at Occidental College is that they actually have a program in social justice as a major at Occidental. So, you know, connecting, I think this, you know, this material, I think resonated with a sector of, you know, the student population in a really wonderful way. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer your question. But yeah, can you restate the question again? Sorry.
I'm just curious about how do, besides a project like this, what are the ways that these communities are accessible or are communicating with people in academia, and are this sort of like this beautiful database of a map that you shared? Like, I've been thinking, how cool would that be as a tool to help students find projects that they could learn about and write about? And really, so I like the I like some using technology for tools like that, but I just thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. No, that's an incredible project, and it is live on, you know, on the web and continues to be added to, and you can actually add to it as so that I think it's a really exciting, I don't know, it was a really exciting project to work on, kind of for that reason, because there were a lot of moments of it's like really crazy right here. There were a lot of moments of kind of
I no
cultural sharing.
longer notice barking in Zoom because it's so common. So no worries.
Such a mess.
Thank you, Kris, for this. And actually, well, as I spoke to Kris about this, I have all the intention to get Kris involved with some of my sessions, my classes. because I care about the applications of cultural products to activism. In this case, art is a cultural product. Therefore, it belongs in my class. I will be continuously in touch as much as I can, Kris.
Yeah. Great.
So we have to let you go.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I'm glad that you're, you know, I was able to talk about the show because you know, it closed about a month plus ago. And I will say that we're working on a catalog for the exhibition, so it'll sort of live on. And some of these kind of connections between the groups and conversations between the individuals in the groups, I think will be documented in this book. So
Thank you so much, Kris.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Kris.
It's a lot of appreciation in the chat for your work, okay?
Thank you. All right.